Hey everybody, this is Dr. Katie Larson,
Sarah Duncan.
and we are good friends. And Sarah and I are actually hypnotherapists together. I am her hypnotherapist and she is my hypnotherapist, and we share. And if you've only known one of us, it's going to be a very interesting introduction today of learning who both of us are when we're together. Because when we are on our phone calls alone, we have these outrageous conversations. And so one day we said we should record these because I think actually people would appreciate like learning about like how people speak about this field, and also like life in general, because I think you and I can get really deep, Sarah.
Hmm.
Like in a 2 second notice, we'll be talking about like the weather, and then we'll be like, do you ever wonder about this? So we thought we would just record our conversation, and we'll hope that it would be a good insight into who we are as practitioners and what kind of work that we do. Do you want to add anything to that, Sarah?
No, I really loved that intro. I would just say we're each other's hypnotherapists, we're each other's confidants and good friends. And I would also just say kindred spirits in a way. And like Katie said, we just get into so many interesting topics in our conversations. And we thought, let's just share with the world what we're talking about today.
Awesome. I'll give a really brief intro of how Sarah and I met one another, because I was trying to remember this morning of like, I think it was like 2021 maybe when we met,
Yep.
and we both were living in Dallas. We're both not in Dallas anymore. I'm in St. Petersburg, Florida, and you are in
Austin,
Austin.
Texas. Hmm.
Right. So we had met while we both were living in Dallas, and the my version of the story is always really interesting because I remember when we were chatting, we were getting so excited and we were like talking about all these things, and it was like a blind date. Like we really didn't know. I think we met each other on like meetup.com or something. Like it
Hmm.
was very like modern romance, but it was like a blind date. And I remember like as I was speaking to you, there was like a little voice in my ear that was like, tell her about the hypnotherapy. Tell her that you want to do hypnotherapy. And I was like, that's weird. I just met this girl. Like, don't be weird, Katie. Because at that point we were like weird, but not too weird. And then I remember I like texted you after our friend date, and I was like, I really had a great time. Want to do it again, maybe this coming Tuesday. And then you wrote back, oh, I'm so sorry, I can't. That's the first day of my hypnotherapy course. And then I was like, okay, universe, I see what you did. And I was like, I've always wanted a hypnotherapy course, but I want to focus on past life regression and life between live sessions. And then you wrote back, yeah, that's what this course is about. And I think it starts next week, and there's only like one spot open. So I called the teacher, got in, and then we were classmates in our hypnotherapy course. And I feel like that little message of like, ask her about the hypnotherapy was like kind of how you and me operate. We have really good intuition and really good connection, like a soul connection. And that was kind of like an insight when we first met.
Yep, that is so cool, Katie. I forgot that I had already signed up for the hypnotherapy course. You were looking for a hypnotherapy course, and then you joined in, and we were classmates together. That is such a cool synchronicity.
Mhm. And then you and I were really good because we were our partners. And so we got to learn all the different modalities, and we had to practice all the time with one another. And so you are the only person in my entire life that knows my inner world as well as I do. You know, all of my spirit guides. I know
True.
yours. We've known each we've known each other in other lives. We found out that we were married when we lived in the South Pacific. You were my wife. I don't remember if I was like something in your life or not. I can't remember if I was like a little brother or
I know,
something.
I think you've been my sister before, for sure. And that's the one I remember right now, but
Yeah.
we just keep showing
And
up.
so we're both a mother of two. That's what we have in common now, is that we both are moms. And we both often message each other when our kids are starting to take a nap or go to bed, and we'll like message each other like, what the fuck? Oh my God. Because some days it's quite difficult. And we are like one day complaining about changing diapers, and then the next day we're talking about the meaning of life, and we can do that very easily. And I think that's fun to share as a friend, as an adult.
It's so important, I think, when you have spiritual connections like we have, that you can talk about things in like different dimensions, and then you can also talk about the real life challenges that you may be experiencing day to day, especially for us as mothers, as business owners. And then you can also like go off and talk about any metaphysical topic out there. But I appreciate that groundedness in our friendship, that it's like it's real life, and then it's like it's real life, you know.
Yeah.
What is real life?
Of like, we'll be like, God, I'm having the hardest time in my, with something with my kids' school. And also like my multidimensional self is having a hard time in a whole other planet right now. I will like laugh about that. But I will do one plug for you because I'm not sure if it will come up today, but it might come up in future conversations. But if it comes up today, I want everyone to know that Sarah is also my human design reader. And so
Mm.
she is an expert on human design, and she's done my chart and everyone in my family's chart. And that's really helped me because I am more forgiving with the relationships that I have in my family because I recognize our human design. And that's, if you don't know much about that, look into Sarah. If you're coming from my followers or my email list, there'll be a link for Sarah. And if you've ever been interested in human design, she is your person for that.
Oh, thanks, Katie.
Yeah. So we said before the call that we're going to riff. But the first thing that we might bring up is what the actual F are we tapping into when we are in hypnosis? Because you and I have done a couple of sessions where it is like bizarre. And like there are things that we're like, this makes me question reality like a lot. And so I'm just going to dangle that out there and you can start if you like and we'll just riff. But like, so just for people that haven't maybe had a hypnotherapy session yet, when you go into hypnosis, there's like a variety of brain states or consciousness states that you go into. And so you like start in alpha and then you go into delta. And then I think you go into theta. And like I think you stay in theta for a really long time. And it's like the deepest state of trance that you can go into. And so you're tapping into things that you don't tap into in your normal day-to-day life. And I think you and I are probably going to share like some things that we've thought that it was like when we've done this with like our clients. But then like I think it's changing the more we do it and the more exposure we get and the more research we have in this like inner realm area. And so we thought we would just share our ideas with the audience because we're having our own moments of like, what are we doing? What is this?
Mhm. Yeah, and when you posed this question to me just the other day, it was something I'd been thinking about a lot, especially after different sessions where originally I got into hypnotherapy and I'd read all these books on past life regression, and Dr. Brian Weiss's work, for instance,
He's our
is very
boy.
clear. He's like, he does past lives, right? Like that's his thing. And then you get into Dolores Cannon's work, and she does past lives for sure, but then also this interesting like multidimensional work and all these things with different life forms and different states of life. And so it's not just human past lives, right?
Yeah, like
And
alien
then
type stuff. Yeah.
exactly. And I felt like as I started to branch out as a practitioner and reading these different things, my clients started bringing really interesting things to me too. And
Same.
when we are tapping into the higher self, we're also tapping into this like source consciousness, channeling like very high loving consciousness, and then experiencing past lives, but then also lives that maybe are going on simultaneously with their current life,
Totally.
and wondering, is that them? Like, what is then the nature of the soul and the nature of one life
Totally.
experience if we're also kind of living lives all together? And then the question arose around time anyway, because I always had a challenge with the words past life. Because
Same.
if time is really here to anchor us in our 3D experience on Earth, for instance, but everything is actually happening simultaneously, then nothing is past, nothing is future. It just is. It's just lives. And so it's like other life regression would be a better
Yeah,
word.
I like that term. Yeah. But that's hard. But gosh, I love the way you put it in chronological order of your own understanding of like, first I looked at Brian Weiss's work and then it like looked at Dolores Cannon's work. And it's like, I think you're right. Of like, I was similar with you. Like I went in thinking like past life, the chronological, like the minute you die in one life, then you're born in another, like, it should be the same year. And I remember really like thinking that through, like, in our little human brains. But then the more you do the sessions as a client, they're telling you all of this information of like, oh no, that's not real. Like like you're getting these like downloads from some other source that's like, oh look, okay, yeah, like everything's happening at once, like everything is simultaneous, like your life, this life is still happening with at the same time that you're living, and so you're like, but I just saw myself die in that life, so like, so did it already happen? Like, can I change the timeline with that? And I remember you're the first person that I was exposed to that like you have both as a client and a practitioner, like changed people's timelines, right? Like when they're in trance, you can kind of like influence the way that like things were working in these other lives, right? Tell me about that.
Yeah, you can. And while I don't change major events typically, I like to shift perspective and
Yeah.
help the person understand what happened. And in that, it's a ripple effect that does change things. So I do know there are practitioners out there that will just maybe suggest a complete change. Like if you got burned in a lifetime by, let's just say, a pot of boiling water, and
Yeah.
now you have eczema on your right leg where the water was, is there an opportunity to maybe change what happened? Yeah, some practitioners might do that. Or is there an opportunity to understand what happened afterwards, to understand the healing process, and to somehow find some relief through understanding? And that's the route that I typically go through is
Yeah.
rather than trying to change an event, change the understanding. Because oftentimes once someone understands what happened to them, let's say it was something completely different, like something I've seen in a client before where, let's say, she was scalped by a Native
Mhm.
American tribe and she was a settler, and um, she gets terrible headaches, right? Her
Yeah.
headaches went away after she experienced that lifetime and she could
Yeah.
understand what happened and release actually the fear of that
Yeah.
incident and the anger and the
Yeah.
confusion surrounding it.
That
And
happened to me. Yeah, keep going.
it's really common, these types of, injuries. And
Right. And
uh,
that seems like a Brian Weiss strategy of like go through the thing that is what's stuck in this life and like really experience it. And then through experience it, you'll heal it. Like that. I was kicked in the head from a horse in another life.
yeah.
And I was having really bad migraines. And then after experiencing that life in past life regression, my migraines decreased significantly. And so it's like what you said, it's like there's something about being able to see it, witness it, and understand, oh, this isn't even from my own life now. It's from this other experience that seems to actually alleviate the pain or the suffering in this life.
Hmm. Yep, absolutely.
And then we also talked yesterday about like, is this a metaphor? Like sometimes, so when you first start to go into this work, there's always like a somewhat safe, healthy skepticism because
Both of us are
you
like big
don't.
skeptics, I would say. Like we're
Mhm.
naturally really skeptical people.
Yeah, we actually
I
are.
think
Yeah,
like
funny enough, because like you and me, like, somebody would come in with like some new fad and we'll be like, I don't know about this.
yeah, exactly.
I
Even with
don't know about this.
hypnotherapy for a while, I was like, I mean, this sounds legit, but like, is it?
Yeah.
Like I had to
Yeah.
experience it for myself, right?
Same. And I had to have several different clients that had weird stuff
Hmm.
before
Hmm.
I was like, whoa, this is real. Because I think when you learn about it in a textbook, like for example, aliens, right? I had always kind of been playing around with aliens and like different beings and different consciousness levels that like reach out to us as humans as like a hobby. But it wasn't until I was a practitioner and I was getting clients that have like a very rich world where they're in touch with these things. And they might be like on a waking state, not at all in touch with that, but then in a sleeping state, very in touch with that. That I was like, okay, there's something to this, right? I mean, you can read a million books about it, but until you're a practitioner and you see it, then you really believe it. And I think you're right. We're skeptical until it's like enough evidence is in our face that you're like, okay, this is like phenomenological evidence. Like you can't disregard it.
Yeah, and then we're able to make the leap. Then we're able to like put our faith in it. But without that foundation, yeah, I just wanted everybody to know that this is
You're
all coming
right.
from natural skeptics, but you just
Yeah.
see enough that you can't explain it. You cannot explain it away.
And this question comes from the skeptics, maybe not even the skeptic, but the brain-based model. So I think like you and me have evolved past the brain-based
Yeah.
model of consciousness. But if you go back to the brain-based model, sometimes I still wonder if certain clients are just having a metaphor.
Okay.
And like they're like unconscious, just like even like you and me had one recently where I was like, I don't know, like it feels like kind of like metaphorical. I don't know if it's real. And so yeah, what are your thoughts on like is sometimes what a client is accessing just a metaphor that their brain is making up versus they're like tapping into a whole other dimension? And like, can we distinguish as practitioners and as clients the difference?
Yes, and I love this question. It reminds me of when I was looking into shamanic journeying, okay? Because in shamanic journeying, there's a lot of metaphor present there as well, but to some, they may call it metaphor, but to some, it may be more real than what they experience when they wake up
Yes.
and they cook breakfast and they go about their lives. So there's a quote, there's a story about somebody asking a shaman from I think like the Andes. They asked him, how do you know that what you're experiencing in a trance state is real? And he said, what I experience in a trance state is actually more real than what you think you're experiencing right now.
Yeah,
So I
I
liked that
agree.
story because it kind of answers a question of like, how important is the question of what's real and what's not? And
Right.
also kind of makes you rethink your reality and everything that you
Yeah.
know as real.
Yeah.
And then the question is, what's a metaphor? What's real? What if the metaphors are all real too?
Yeah.
I don't know if
Hmm.
you've ever seen the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Yes, right. Where
So
there's like a
in that,
multiple different realities
it's
that bleed
exploring the
through.
multiverse and it's like
Yeah.
everything's possible there, anything everywhere all at once. And it just brings up how much to me, I was like, wow, that really adds a lot to when I have an experience in trance where I'm a cartoon and everyone around me is a cartoon, let's say.
Yeah.
And I think afterwards, that was ridiculous, definitely a metaphor, you know? Who's to say
Maybe.
that is metaphorical or if that is somewhere, everywhere, all at once, me tapping into something, and it just is. And maybe it's real because I thought of it, you know?
Yeah. Right. Yeah,
Um,
and I think like you and I have also done so one thing that's fun to compare and we've done it and I think our clients have as well is like substance based like trance and realms and then non-substance based trance and realms. And so like what we do now is non-substance based because it's like using, the power of your unconscious and the different states of consciousness to go into somewhere else. But we've also taken psychedelics or, even marijuana for me is quite like psychedelic in nature. And like I kind of have had substance-based like reality shifts as well. And I feel a huge difference because I find that the substance-based ones are really hard to remember
mm,
because you're not narrating it. Whereas the substance-free ones, like what we do, I find is really helpful to remember because you're narrating it. But similar to what you mentioned about the shaman, is like I can remember very well almost all of the sessions that I've ever had under hypnosis. I can't remember what I ate for lunch yesterday. And that was real, right? So it's like my
yeah.
memory. You would think that your memory in real life would be more potent or more like visceral, but I feel like I still remember my first past life regression better than anything from when I was 20, right? So it's like that is another weird thing to think about is like the difference between different altered states.
Mm. Yeah, and I've thought about this too, especially having experiences with psychedelics, let's say, where I was very much made aware of the fact that what I'm experiencing with my five senses is limited and it's not the full
Right.
picture. And what I really got away from it was appreciation for that awareness because it made me even more open to what I'm experiencing in a trance state. And I
Yes.
think, regardless of metaphor or real or whatever you want to say it, are you getting some type of value out of it? Because oftentimes, whether you're having some type of spiritual, metaphorical journey in a trance state, or you're tapping into a real past life or life between lives or something like that, are you getting some type of value and insight out of it? Because I think what I love bringing to myself when I go into trance states and what I love bringing to my clients is some type of insight, some type of
Yeah.
awareness that they just can't get when they are in their high beta mental state trying to figure it out. It's
And think
like,
think their way out of everything.
exactly.
I have a question. So
Okay,
this is something my
pause your
people, oh,
question
go
for a
ahead.
second. Pause your
Okay.
question for a second. This is unprecedented. She only took like a 40-minute nap and she
Oh,
is
your
in
child.
bed peeking out. So can you
Should we
hold that
pause this?
question? Yeah, just pause
Yes.
it for a second and
Okay.
we can pick it back up. I'm
Pause
just
it.
going to go hand her to my
I love it.
mother-in-law.
See how real this is? This is how our real life is. We were just talking about altered states of consciousness, and now you have to go get your baby. See, it's like we're toggling. I'm going to pause it for this, and then I'll unpause it when you return. Okay, we're back for the
Okay.
most realistic depiction of being a mother and a hypnotherapist.
I will say, if, if I'm in a session with you, that won't happen.
No, the
But
kids are gone.
if I'm in a casual conversation with you, it may happen. So go ahead, Katie. What was your question?
Okay, yeah. Okay, so I had a question about I get this a lot from my clients, but I want to know your perspective, and I'll give my perspective after yours of what are the pros and cons of doing a session? It could be any kind. It could be passive regression, it could be life between lives, inner child healing, or whatever. From the perspective of it, and this is what I've had maybe 10 people say to me, I don't want to open up a can of worms. Even my own mother, she doesn't want to open up a can of worms. I would never want to do hypnotherapy. I don't want to see what's in there. So, like, if you had to describe for you, now that you've done a million kinds of sessions, because we've done them all, you and I, what are the pros and cons of get the can opener out, opening up the worms? Like, you know what? Why? Why do this?
Well, I think I think it's always going to give you something to chew on, right? So you're going to chew on some worms. You're going to chew on that can of worms after you have a session. It's going to have you something to consider. And I think for a lot of people, they may not, might just not be a right modality for them if they're not willing and interested in having something to consider that's outside of the norm, that's outside of their day-to-day type of normal. But for those that are looking for some answers, that are maybe looking for some healing, that are looking for some type of insights, some type of peek past the veil, then it can provide a lot of clarity, insight, and support for whatever they're going through. What are your thoughts on that, Katie?
I was trying to like listen to you fully and not think of what I was going to say next, but I'll wing it. Um, I think I'll start with the cons because, you know, there aren't a lot, in my opinion, because I'm like, if I can, I will, like kind of a person, like if I can peek inside the veil, I'm going under the whole veil. But I will say the con for me, and I think actually when I started to think of this when you were talking about being in an altered state of consciousness with substances and you were like looking at your hands, because it's like, how many times have we been like, my hands are amazing, like when you're like high. But like there's something that when you're high turns off in your brain and like you can like multidimensionally exist for a minute. And then when you sober up, you go back to the five senses. And I can see why if you always lived in that multidimensional world, it would be exhausting. Because as an empath and as somebody who has these little special powers, like I can see auras and I can see energy and stuff, sometimes I don't like that. Like it's really tiring. And so to tie it into hypnosis of the con is sometimes you do learn information about things about you or other people that like is an additional, I don't know,
Like layer of
value, like
complexity?
layer of reality, right? Of like, you killed me one time, you motherfucker. Like you can see things
Yeah.
that like, like like I had a person that I knew and they like killed me once. And I was like, this fucking guy, like he's still in my life. Can't leave me alone, and it's like that really annoyed me. And so I think like it's an added layer. That's the con for me, an added layer. But the pro, I think, is you've nailed it. It is like maybe the equivalent of that little troll under the bridge that like has all these little riddles. And if you're brave enough to answer the riddle, it lets you underneath the bridge or over the bridge to the next level of yourself. And I think having the courage to encounter whatever it is that's like holding you back, whether it's like an inner child thing, or if it's a past life thing, or like even a generational lineage thing, if you have the courage to go there in this like safe inner realm, then you like warp to the next level of your reality when you wake up. And it's like really crazy for me. And I think you can share this too, of clients that like that's the work. Like, with your therapy, it's like 10 sessions of talking about it. But in hypnotherapy, it could be like a 90-minute session and you never have that problem again. Right.
Mhm.
Like you can share with everyone your experience with that, but it's like it is like a fast forward warp speed to like another level of you.
Absolutely. And that's why I like calling it quantum healing because it's the
Yeah.
quantum you and anything is possible in that 90-minute session, let's say, or maybe it's a QHHT session and it's like, half a day. But regardless, you can get so much accomplished in such a little time because you go straight to the seed of meaning and the seed of insight in a session
Yeah.
instead of trying to talk your way around it and figure it out and talk through it, which of course there's always a time and place for talking
Sure.
about
Some
it
people
too.
need that to process, which is why QHHT is interesting because it's like half talk, half
Yeah,
hypno. Yeah. But keep
totally.
going.
Um, but it can be really, really helpful in a really short amount of time because of what you mentioned. I also think that there is a safety guard built into us that
Yeah.
we're only going to see what we're ready to see.
Agreed.
So
Yes.
sometimes I have a client come in and they do want to go back and try to understand what happened to them in their childhood, let's say. And maybe
Very
they'll get a
common.
metaphorical type of experience of what happened in their childhood
Yes.
because their conscious self is actually still blocking the true memory from them.
Yes. That happened
Sometimes
with
someone
me as
comes
a
in.
client. Yes. Mhm.
Yep, exactly. So sometimes they will come in and they will experience what happened that night, those nights, whatever it was. And sometimes they may just get a metaphor or something else to try to understand that. And then I think it's our job as a hypnotherapist to help them in the session understand whether this was a metaphor or the real thing or whatever that was, and then find some healing through it. So my goal
Yeah.
as a hypnotherapist is never to leave somebody with the can of open worms to figure it out themselves.
Right.
It's like we're going to take the worms out of the can, we're going to look at them, we're going to see what they really are,
Yeah.
and then we're going to start the healing process. And
That's one thing you and me promised each other that when we started working, that, we had different other people that trained us or other people that we worked with that were like, see you never. Like, like, and you and I said to each other, let's never do that to our clients because so I think we both like have, email and I have like a voice notes that like we make sure our clients can use after the sessions because of what you just said of like, here's the worms. You're going to help in the session. We're going to help you process it. But then afterwards, like keep in touch because this stuff can get weird and you don't have a lot of people to talk to about it except for the person that like opened the door for you. And so I really I remember you and I saying that of like let's never be those people that just like put you on an island and then be like see ya, good luck, because
good
that's
luck
just
with
not who
your
we
like
are.
sudden spiritual awakening that you just opened up. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So I do think that there is some protective guardrails there where I think you're not going to open up past what you can handle too.
Agreed.
So I
And
think
when you do the QHHT sessions and you're talking to your higher self or your subconscious, it'll tell you that. It'll
yeah.
say like, oh, she's not ready for this, or like, oh, I've done telling her this. I love it when, let's talk about QHHT for a minute, because you do that, I do that. Let's talk about it because those are the funniest sessions ever because someone's such in deep trance, they're like channeling something. And sometimes their subconscious talks smack about them, but in a nice way. But it'd be like, I've been telling her every day and she's not listening to me. And it's like, as a practitioner, it's almost comical to watch the subconscious a character that is not at all like the
Mhm.
character. Actually, should I just tell the audience just in case they don't know what QHHT is, real quick, what it
Yeah, it's a
is?
great idea.
Okay, and Sarah does this. She's wonderful at it. I do this as well. Okay, so QHHT is a proper technique that is developed by Dolores Cannon. It stands for I always mess this up. You say it, Sarah, because you're better at that.
Quantum
Remember.
healing, yeah, quantum healing hypnosis technique.
Brilliant. Because I always leave off one of the T's, right? Or whatever. I always leave off one of the H's. I'm always like QHT. You're like, there's two H's.
I'm like, oh.
That's why we're friends, because you can be like, yo, Katie, you've been saying it wrong like for the last hour. But so it is by Dolores Cannon. And so when you see me or Sarah for our regular hypnotherapy sessions, it's like our shtick. It's like our own specialized way of doing it. But when you see like the QHHT, it's like a little bit more Dolores Cannon style, because that's the way we had to learn it. And it's like a 5 hour session minimum. Right. So like the first 2 to 3 hours is a chronological history of your life by consciousness. So, like you're speaking consciously, like how we are now, about your whole entire life. And then after that, you are brought into a trance, you're brought into another life, then you're brought into it's like a deeper trance that is like the deepest trance you could possibly be in. And then your higher self or your subconscious, she calls it the subconscious, channels through you all these answers. So like you come with like, 15, 20 questions, and then the practitioner reads the questions and then you channel the answers. And then at the end, we discuss everything when you've come out of hypnosis, and we talk about it. And so it's long, right? Like there are multiple snacks involved. Like there's
Bathroom
multiple
break.
bathrooms. Yes, there are multiple bathroom breaks. But, and I want you to just share your insight on this because you're the one that got me interested in QHHT. But one of the things that I found really fascinating would be like if you have a personality in your conscious state that's really quiet and demure and proper, and then your subconscious is like, yeah, this is going on and that's going on. And like as a practitioner, you're like, what just happened? It's like completely different. Or the vice versa of like someone's really outrageous and like, you know, their subconscious is like this sweet little old man that's like speaking in riddles. And you're just like, what is happening? And so that's what gives this a lot of credibility for me is that people change dramatically when you're talking to their subconscious. But I'm sure we could share stories about this all day long. But what is your experience with QHHT and how do you feel about it as a practice or a technique?
I mean, just to quickly go off of what you just said, when I'm talking to someone subconscious, I love, or their higher self, a lot of times I ask the person what term resonates with them the most, and I'll use that for them. But when I'm talking to that type of very high source consciousness, just to give you some other words to think about. When I'm talking to that, I love the humor that comes through. You think that
They're
the
funny.
higher self that may be very angelical and very sincere, but yeah, a lot of times I get a lot of humor, funny, like you said, the person's higher self just saying like, I've been telling her for a decade now, this is what she's got to do, but she's not doing it, and da, 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 you know? And honestly,
Totally.
that's how my SC comes through as well. Dolores calls it the subconscious or the SC. My SC comes through like that, and sometimes even has a southern accent.
Mine always tells me I'm stubborn, Katie. She's so stubborn. I'm like, these lots of conscious, but it's always right. It's
Yeah.
always right. It's like she's so stubborn. She just won't listen to authority sometimes when she needs to. And I'm like, yeah, I don't. But then but that's
Oops.
gotten her in a
Or
lot of
right.
trouble.
Yeah, and I feel like it comes through in a way that is going to be most receptive for the person who needs to hear it. So if you need a kick in the butt, your subconscious or your higher self is going to come through and give you a kick in the butt. If you actually just need a loving hug, then your subconscious is going to come through. I've had the most loving, the ones that you would think of as like the higher self. I've heard those voices come through, and it's literally like I'm talking just to God. Like
Yeah.
I can't describe it any other
They
way. And
know
I'm
us really
sitting there
well too.
listening, and I'm
Mhm.
just like, goosebumps, full body goosebumps. And I'm like, there's no way that this information is coming from anything other than the highest source consciousness you could ever channel, ever. And I get to sit here and talk to you right now. Yes. So it's kind of a wet dream for me as a
Yeah. And
hypnotherapist
as a
when we
practitioner, you're
get,
like,
yeah,
yes. Well,
when we,
sometimes, and you're not supposed to do this as a practitioner, but sometimes the subconscious or the higher self will like try to provoke you as a practitioner, and they'll like say something to you to try to like
oh,
make you believe it. And that happened to me one time with a client where they're like, it said like, Katie isn't believing that this is real, but she needs to remember that when she had a client the other day that was, trying to access her dead mother, that, and it like said something from the session. And this client that I was working with had no idea about the other client. And when she woke up, she kind of sort of remembered what the subconscious said. And she's like, what was that story about the other client? I was like, your subconscious reached over into my life with my clients and told me a story about it in our session. And that was like, whoa. And then you have to like stay cool as a practitioner. And you're like, thank you. Thank you for that information. But inside, I was like, my heart was racing and I'm like, holy cow. And this is like going back to the first question of what you and I talked about. It's like, what are we engaging with? What is
mm,
this? And we could
yeah.
answer it a million different ways.
Hmm. Oh, yeah. Because at that point, and this is what I think I get really giddy about as a hypnotherapist, is engaging and helping my clients connect with the consciousness of all that is.
Yeah.
I don't know another way to put it, but
Yeah.
in a session, regardless of the experience they have, whether it is a past life, current life, future life, a metaphorical type of spiritual journey, I always try to get them at some point in contact with a spirit guide, with an ancestor, with a loved one, with um, their higher self or source consciousness, whatever ends up coming through. And every session is a little different. But I love to get them in contact with that because I want everybody to know that we always have an opportunity to connect there, you know?
Always. Yeah.
Obviously, like getting into a trance state, you may receive a more clear signal. You may be able to hear things that you couldn't hear when you're just asking, trying to
Mhm.
ask when you're in a really conscious, high beta state. And that's what I think is so cool about hypnotherapy. I don't
Yeah.
know exactly what we're tapping into, but it's some type of higher consciousness outside of
Right.
where we are now, and we all have access to it all the time. I really do think that we're all just like radio towers, and we
I
can all
agree.
always tap in, always, because we're here in this body and we're also
Yeah.
there. And we're also there. Like, but how do you
And
explain
it
that?
seems,
What's your take?
oh, all of that. Like, it's so interesting because I feel like what you said was so accurate of, if anything, who cares what we call it, as long as you can tap into it. And I think that we wrongfully so name things sometimes that maybe like it needs a name because you have to describe it somehow, but maybe it's all one conglomerate of like the field, that like we're just tapping into the field of like shared consciousness or the collective consciousness, or even just like, when you and I are chatting, like just like this, every once in a while, you and I are dipping in and out of each other's, fields, even though we're not next to each other. And it's like, I recognize, especially like maybe like a soul contract one, when you're summoning in the energies of people, and like when you say, like, okay, now here, who's coming through, they know every single time, oh, that's my brother. Oh, wow. Yeah, my brother's in the room, and even if they're passed away, it's like, oh my God, my father's here. He passed away 10 years ago, but it's like his energy just fills the room. It's like there is a very recognizable energy that we can tap into, that we're like, oh, that's so and so's energy and that's so and so's energy, right? So it's like we know that like separate energy is very real. Like we know that. But then that collective energy, when we're like plugged into that, oh my God, it's unreal. Because I find like when you and I were talking about this before we started recording about like, well, like, because we had a session a couple days ago and I was like, all of this stuff that I was saying, it happened that night and the next day. And so it was like I was tapping into almost like my future while we were in our session. And it's like, so that made me question, like, hey, we should have a conversation and record it. But it was almost like when you were saying before, like when people are conscious and they're trying to like think their way out of it and they just can't think their way out of it. I feel like thinking your way out of it is like when you're running into a wall. You just keep running into the wall because that's all you can see. And then there's something that, like, when you zoom out into this collective, you see over the wall and you're like, oh, there's a hammer over here. You can get through the wall, but you have to zoom out. And that zooming out, that's like the tapping into the field. Like, that's the tapping into the collective. That's like tapping into something that, like, we actually can do, but you can't do it consciously. You have to do it in this weird state. And I find that's like what fascinates me is like it's just accessing a different state and then you see it. Does that make sense?
Yep. That
I
it
went
definitely
everywhere with
makes
that.
sense. No, I mean, we both bring in so many metaphors into conversation to try to describe what we're seeing again and again and again.
Yeah.
And this is what I see as well. If we keep your metaphor of the wall and somebody kind of hitting their head against it. And I was here too. This was the first reason why I was interested in hypnotherapy was because I felt like I kept hitting my walls with different programs in my life, different, just ways of being, these habits, behaviors, ways of thinking, especially, just kept hitting this wall. And one second.
Very good.
So I've got my
This
toddler.
is so, I love it. This is motherhood.
You go. Oh.
For those of you at home, Sarah has a toddler and a baby, and I have a 7-year-old and a toddler.
Better now?
And so we're often sharing toddler stories of like, listen to this shit.
Okay.
And then it will evolve into, have you ever thought about the meaning of life about this part of it?
About consciousness, Katie. So, so
So you
I
were
kept
bumping
hitting,
in all
I
your
kept hitting my
programs
own
and
wall,
stuff.
right? I kept hitting my own wall. And then when I was able to go into that trance state and see what the wall was, sometimes that's it. Sometimes you find out what the wall is.
You're right. And that sometimes the wall is like tiny and you
Sometimes the
thought it
wall,
was giant. Yeah.
right. Sometimes the wall is actually just like a curtain and you're like, "Wink, wink, wink," and you go about your way. Sometimes the wall's still there, but at least you have a higher perspective and you can see that you're behind the wall right now. But if you just wait and you keep following your truth, then you're just gonna end up, there's gonna be a little door that appears there and you walk on through. And so, different things happen for different people. Sometimes it's one session, sometimes it's multiple sessions, but whatever it is, that door, it either dissolves, a little door appears, or it wasn't there at all to begin with. And
Mhm.
so um that's like it goes back to that quantum part of it where it's just when you can see that higher perspective, sometimes higher consciousness is coming through giving you that higher perspective. Sometimes it's that higher consciousness, your own consciousness, that's creating this metaphor for you to see through. There's so much healing there that's possible. And
Yeah.
I don't like overusing the word healing because I feel like sometimes it's applied so much, but what I really mean is there's movement, there's
Yeah.
progress
I like
forward.
growth, that word
Growth.
growth. Yeah.
Yeah, so much
Mhm.
growth, healing, progress, movement away from that stagnation that you may have been feeling in your life,
Yeah.
away from, just that anger, the pain, the suffering, the thoughts that won't stop. Suddenly you have that higher perspective. And I can't tell you how many times I have had clients leave a session and it's like they are 10 feet off the ground,
It's
they're
true.
or like 10 inches hovering above the ground, or
Yeah.
it looks like they lost 20 pounds in one
Or
session
they're
just
like
because.
bright yellow or like bright white and they're like illuminating. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. And I had another metaphor that I used once with a client that I'll just like piggyback off of what you were saying of like the zooming out and like the connection to like that source because I was like because he met his higher self for the first time. And this higher self had like unreal advice. Like, I mean, it was just spot on. And not only advice, but like past times in his life when the higher self or the spirit guides of this person like intervened. And he was like, I was always surprised by like how I got out of that sticky situation. But it was like the higher self was like, oh, here's how we rigged that, you know? And he was, what is this? Like, how is this real? And I said, to me, sometimes I recognize that the higher self is player one and you are Mario. and you are just one of the characters. Because like when we really like get into it, like if you and me were on the phone right now, we'd be like, you're Mario, but you're Luigi and Peach and Toad and all the other ones too, right? Like, but they're in a different life. But let's not talk about that. But let's just talk about Mario. Like you're the Mario, and the Mario is just jumping around doing all the things. But there is a player that is up there playing you. And that player has a very much better view of this, the whole game board and the whole level and the whole everything. And so, like, they can manipulate your little avatar into doing different things. And every once in a while, you can access player one. And the only reason you can't every day is because we've made some agreement that we don't want to remember that there's a player one. And it's like that really helped him understand, like, okay, so like it's not a cheat code, is it, to like access player one? You know, like I feel like it's cheating. Like if I wanted to be Mario and I agreed to be Mario, like shouldn't I only be Mario and never get a cheat code?
Mhm,
And I
mhm,
said, well, sometimes you don't want a cheat code. That's what makes life so hard, is that we're like, nah, I'm going to do this the human way. But other times, get the cheat code. Just get the cheat code. Go into trance, find out what you're like not seeing. You know, maybe
mhm,
the obstacle's really easy, and take a cheat code, because otherwise it just makes things too difficult, if that makes sense.
mhm.
But he loved that metaphor. And I still use that to this day with people because I feel like it does explain it in a way that's like technological based, but still kind of accurate.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think it adds a lot of color to what we see with our clients. And for me personally, I also see a lot of times where people want the cheat code and they come to me
Yeah,
because they want a cheat code. And then sometimes you're not meant to have a cheat code because
true.
you gotta just trust yourself. It's a part
That
of
was
your
part of the
lesson.
lesson.
Yeah, and so sometimes people come and they don't get an answer to a question and they feel really frustrated, but then they find out it is because it's up to them. It's part of their free will. It's a part of their destiny. It's a part of their lesson that, there's no quick fix. Like I had a client come to me with a QHHT session, and one of her questions was, "Can you please do away with all of my negative thinking, all of my self-doubt, all of my lack of confidence, and give me full confidence and full belief?" And da, da, da. And I
Yeah,
was like,
done.
"Okay, I'll ask. I'll ask. I'll ask,
Yeah,
but we'll see." And sure enough, the SC said, "This is a part of your journey. Trust your process, and we'll give you a boost today. This session is giving you a boost. You're never going to be the same, but know that your path to believing in yourself, believing in your confidence and your powers and your gifts is a part of your life story. I can't just expedite it to the end because that's the story."
yeah, and like maybe, going back to like the video game analogy, is like sometimes with these like struggles of like the self-doubt and all of the negative thinking, like all of that, it's almost like, each character, when back in the old days at least, like they would have like a character, and on the screen it would have like a scale of like, this is how strong they are on a scale of 1 to 10, this is how smart they are on a scale of 1 to 10, and so on and so forth, right? And it's like I do feel as if some of us, all of us, like we kind of come in and we have gifts that are like, 10 out of 10 and like clairvoyance, or 10 out of 10 in empathy. But then like you have like 1 out of, like mine was like 1 out of 10 in athletic ability, it's like maybe one day you could go to 4 out of 10, but it's like we come in with challenges and we come in with gifts. And I think that part of our work as practitioners is reminding people their gifts, because a lot of us, we don't see them, we don't use them, and we don't even realize that they're real. And some of them are kind of like far out, like clairvoyance and clairaudience and stuff like that. So I don't know, you want to share anything about that
Yeah,
thoughts?
I'll just say that I've had a lot of clients come back to me and say, sessions with you was a massive part of my spiritual awakening, was a massive part of
Agreed.
me trusting in what I was receiving, trusting the information I was receiving.
Yes.
Because I always remind a client after they've talked to a spirit guide, their higher self, the SC, whoever it may be, I always remind them in the session and afterwards that you can talk to them at any time. You can reach out and make contact with this source consciousness at any time. You don't need me to do it. I'm helping you right now. I helped, like you said, open the door. I helped you make the connection today, but this is your birthright. This is
Yeah,
something that's accessible to you all the time. And this love is always here for you. It's always around you. So
you're right.
I've had a lot of people afterwards just really have their gifts pop off and they come to me,
You're
they're like,
right.
now I'm doing this and now I'm seeing this and now I feel so sensitive. I can really hear people's thoughts, like all types
I
of
think
different things.
because maybe our role, and I've said this before, but I think our role is okay, so you and I work a lot with highly sensitive people. This just tends to be our clientele. It's not only our clientele, but our clientele is often empaths and highly sensitive people. And I feel like when you're highly sensitive, it feels like being born with a backpack. And inside the backpack, there's tons of stuff, but like you might not know what's in it. So you're just like weighed down by this really heavy backpack your whole life until you meet someone who opens up their backpack and takes something out. And you're like, what is that? And you're, oh, you've got one in your bag too. Like this is a
Right.
gift. Like you can
Let's say
use
it's a
it at any
flashlight.
time.
It's like a really
Yeah,
heavy big torch. It's a big flashlight, right? And they're holding it.
right.
Oh, it just makes
Exactly.
yeah.
And
And
you
the
like
other
are
person is like,
teaching them what's in their bag
they
of
like
like,
turn
no,
it
you
on.
have this.
And it's like, oh,
Mm,
this is a light. I can shine
yes,
it anywhere and see into the darkness.
totally.
Sit.
Exactly. And it's like, how many of these fucking backpacks have we been carrying around? And then you open it up yourself and you not only have that light, but you have like a whole bunch of a compass and a map and all these things. And then you start to play with it. And
Yeah.
I think it's like people like you and I, like you give permission to open your backpack. It's heavy because it's filled with cool stuff. But it's like it doesn't have to weigh you down because you can use those things. And I think that's our role in life. At least that's how I see myself. And I know you're that way for me, like you've encouraged me. I'm like, oh no, you have this skill. Like you really need to use that more. And I'm like, I do. And I think like we do that for one another. We do that with our clients. I think that's just part of our life's purpose.
Absolutely. Helping someone see themselves more clearly. And that's definitely what you do for me as well, Katie. And um, it's been really a journey in hypnotherapy. All of my trance states sessions with you have been really, really opening for me to see myself and to see what I'm capable of tapping into. And I really understand my sensitivity. Like you said, we're both sensitive people, very compassionate and empathic people. And sometimes that can feel like a big burden. It can feel like it makes everything difficult sometimes in relationships. But at the same time, we wouldn't be able to do this work if we didn't have this sensitivity and this skill set. Because these sessions, so much of it is it's almost guided by our higher selves too. I'm not going to say that
Yes.
it's like my training makes me a great hypnotherapist. So much of it is intuitive for me, and I know it is
Mhm.
for you too. And we have to trust that intuition. And if we hadn't developed it, we couldn't be the practitioners that we are either.
Yeah.
Because not
I remember when we were in class together one day, and I think you have what I have, but not everybody in the class had this. And I like
no,
raised my
exactly.
hand and I was like, is it a thing like when you're like going through somebody's session that like you're envisioning like every single thing that they're saying and like sometimes you see it before they say it? And like I was like, and I think you were like, it happens to me too. And the teacher's like, no, that doesn't really happen very often.
Yeah.
And I
So
was like, that's the only way I'm doing this. Like, I remember one time, like this woman, she was like going into her room and she's like opened the door and I saw the room before she described it. And it had like black and white tiles and it had like arches. And it's funny, I have arches behind me, synchromistic. But like, and I saw it first. And then she's like, it has black and white tiles and it has arches. And I'm like, what? So again, it's like, what is this field? But somehow when we are in it with our clients, that sensitivity kicks in and we're following along in a way that's like multidimensional, that isn't always um apparently common, and it isn't always explainable of how you're doing it.
yep, it's like a mind meld. Just
Yeah.
join up forces with their mind and I see what they see. I think we're both very visual people and not all of our clients are visual in
Mhm.
their journey. Like they might just be sensing it, they might just
Yeah.
be feeling it. But for you and I both, we've talked about this, we're very visual and it's like I'm watching a movie inside my
Right.
mind. And I can see exactly what they're describing. And like you said, I can often see it before they tell me what it is they're experiencing.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
I like that. And then
Amazing
sometimes
gift.
it's weird too. I love it when I do the soul contract type ones and the people come in the room and I can kind of get a vibe. Like I remember one woman's dad had like smell of like tobacco and he had a blue hat and like she told me later like, oh yeah, he was like so and so baseball fan and they have a blue color hat and I'm like, There you go.
I
I mean, you
saw
can't make
him.
that stuff up. Yeah. And you
Yeah.
could smell them, you know? So it's like, that's a weird part of what we do. Actually, that's a good question of like, it's like, you know, inside baseball, inside hypno. What do you do to disconnect from your clients when you're done?
I really learned this one the tough way because sometimes these sessions, it's like they have an imprint on my soul too.
Right.
Sometimes I think sometimes I'm meant to see them too. You know, I feel like a lot
Mhm.
of these sessions come up for my healing, for my understanding, my expansion as well. And that's what's really beautiful about this work is like every session, whether we're working through shame, whether we're working through some other element, anger, the human experience, trust, relationships, cheating, like whatever it might be, like these different things are coming up for me too. So sometimes I receive the session and I thank them for sharing it with me, right? And sometimes, um, sometimes I need to let go of what I saw too, because maybe it was some type of traumatic experience and I don't need to add that to my memory bank, right? But I remember so well
Same.
whatever happened. And I just want to fall asleep at night thinking about some fun recipes to make and like what cookies I'll make
Yeah.
this weekend. Like I don't need to necessarily worry
Yeah. I'm
about
not into that childhood
other
trauma that I've went
like
through. Yeah.
intergalactic traumatic experience that I just saw. So
Yeah.
it's almost like I just have to say, I take what's mine, I leave what's not mine,
Yeah.
and kind of move on. And I feel like I have that energetic agreement with my work. What do you do?
I do a couple physical things now. I do a lot of grounding activity where I'm like grounding myself on the ground and I connect with both like the sun and the earth and I do a chakra clearing and then I like go like this and I kind of shake it out and then if there's no other clients at the end of the day, I go swimming. And there's something or take a
Water,
shower. There's something
water.
with the water, yeah, that helps me because I had a couple of really earlier in the year, like really intense sessions. And I didn't take a shower or swim, and it really stuck with me. And then the next day I did one and I used the water aspect and it helped. So I think that for me, there is a very funny enough, like when my clients come out, my trick is I always give them sugar because you're in this higher realm. And so the sugar brings you back into your body because you have your blood sugar will increase and like your heart rate will change. And so you get back and you become more embodied. And I think for me as well, I need to do something that's very material and very physical, or I'm like in the ethers. Like one time I was like riding my bicycle home from a session and I didn't really, you know, do a good job like disconnecting. And I almost crashed my bicycle because I was just like living in wherever I was, you know, like whatever
Your
realm
vision
that
took
is.
back over there. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've done that
And I
too with
couldn't get
like
back
daydreaming.
down. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
yeah.
so like you have
And
to really ground.
and I think we both of us try to teach our clients that too because it is important
Yeah.
to give that time. I never rush someone out of my office or out of my Zoom. I try to give them some time, and I always encourage them to bring a snack so they can eat some food
Yes. That
and drink
helps.
some water because
The
water
water.
is amazing and food is amazing. It's almost like in the myths when somebody goes into another realm and they eat the food there, it like grounds them to that realm. Well,
I
we're
know.
back
You're like,
here
don't eat the
now.
cupcakes. Yeah, don't eat the
Yeah.
mushrooms from the fairies. Yeah.
Yeah, like don't eat there, but eat back in your realm because this life is what matters now. This is where you're meant to be now. This is what's most important now. So go
Yeah.
grab a chocolate here in your house with your family where you're supposed to be now, and that does really help.
And I think you do a really good job. You did a session for me yesterday, and I really liked what you added in because you added in something that was newer. And I like that you use this of like, it doesn't matter what you uncovered in your session today. The only timeline and the only moment that is important for you at this time is the present moment. Oh, I'm going to use that. I'm going to use that with my clients because I really, that helped me because I was like, wherever the F I was. And then you really brought me back into like the present moment by saying that at the end.
Yeah, whatever you experienced in the session was a curiosity, something to learn from, but what matters most is your current timeline and your life now.
See,
And
you've got
that
it down
that
pat.
verbiage helps me too.
Yes. Yes. Because, you know, you'll kind of fiddle around. Like it's impossible not to fiddle around with what you like learned in those sessions. In fact, I keep thinking about a few things, you know, of like, what was that? And then like weirdly, those things that like we're fiddling around with for a long time will like show up later. in our life, like 2 or 3 days later. And my clients have called me and they're like, remember the rubber duck? And I kept seeing a rubber duck and I didn't know what it was from. I'm like, yeah. They're like, someone put a rubber duck on my front porch this morning, or something weird. And you're like, that is the curiosities of this work that like makes it feel very real, that like you're accessing these realms and there's almost like a wink, wink, nod, nod from the universe. But if you don't ground into the present moment and you don't try to focus on like this normal life that you're trying to live, it can be really taxing and tiring.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. But yeah, I love that. I have clients tell me all the time that, this dove that was in their session, they're like, there was a dove outside my office today and it wouldn't stop singing. I've never seen it before in my life. It's just those, like you said, the wink, wink, the reminder, someone,
Yes.
the energy coming through being like, yeah, you know what you just saw? Like, believe it.
Yeah, and like Jung, like Carl Jung, who like we love, we're very Jungian psychology fans. Like that's how he initially like described synchronicity. It was like he had a client, and the client was talking about beetles, and then a beetle flew in to the windowsill, and he was like, like okay, there's something here. And so I find like that's what this work does is it opens up synchronicities, it opens up the meaning of consciousness, of reality. And if you're into that stuff, we are the best people to help you along with that. But I don't know, shall we slowly wind down? Is there anything else that you want to share with people? And if people really like this, we'll do more. But is there any kind of closing remarks or any statements you want to make?
Honestly, I want to talk more next time. Like, I'm like, I don't care if anybody else wants to hear more. I want to talk more. This is so fun,
I
Katie.
know.
Thanks for having this
Same.
conversation with me. I mean, we could go for another few hours, but I agree it's time to wind down for now. So until next time, and I would just say to anybody listening that if you feel called and interested in working with either of us and exploring your own inner consciousness and connecting with higher consciousness, whatever that might be for you, don't hesitate to reach out.
Yes, agreed. And if you have other topics as a listener that you're like, you know what?
Mm.
You guys started talking about this, but then you got distracted. Can you go back to the thing? What did you mean by that when you said this? Like, well, we love that. We could, next time we'll have drinks at the same time and we'll be like, let's go back to the thing we talked about earlier. Because it's just a fun topic to go into. And both of us, we just love our jobs. Love, love, love our jobs, love our clients, love helping people. And it's just like a bonus of how weird it is. But we're fans of weird, so we really
Sure.
enjoy that.
Mhm.
All right, everybody. Thank you, and we'll see you again in the future. Take care out there.